What would you do if the angriest man in the courtroom turned out to be carrying a war no one else could see? Before this story ends, Judge Caprio is going to look a broken veteran in the eyes, remove his glasses, and say 7 words that leave the whole room in tears. Drop a comment telling us right now whether you believe justice should punish pain or understand it. At 9:14 on a cold Thursday morning in Providence, Rhode Island, nobody in Courtroom 3 expected anything more than another traffic case. A few fines, a few excuses, maybe a warning. But by 10:02, a packed gallery would be silent enough to hear someone crying in the back row. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the most powerful courtroom moments are the ones nobody sees coming. The man at the center of it all did not look like someone ready for mercy. He looked like trouble. He stood 6'2", shoulders squared, jaw clenched so hard you could see the pulse jumping in his cheek. His name was Daniel Mercer, 41 years old, former Army Staff Sergeant, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and that morning he wore a black Carhartt jacket zipped halfway up, a faded olive drab ranger's cap, dark jeans with white drywall dust on the knees, and a pair of tan Timberland Pro boots so scuffed they looked like they had crossed more than one battlefield. He was not there for one ticket. He was there for 4: parking in a disabled access zone, failure to obey a traffic signal, driving with expired registration, disorderly conduct toward an officer. Like this video if you believe the first impression can be dead wrong because what happens next is not what anybody in that room expected. Judge Frank Caprio glanced down at the file, then up at Daniel, and the first thing he noticed was not the anger. It was the stillness. Men who are merely irritated shift, sigh, roll their eyes. Daniel stood still, too still, like movement itself might break something loose inside him. Still, nobody in that gallery was feeling sorry for him yet. Because behind Daniel, seated 3 rows back in a navy wool coat and a gray knit hat, was 68-year-old Teresa Callahan, a widow from Cranston who had been forced to wait in sleet outside Rhode Island Hospital after a van could not access the Ada curb, because Daniel's 2011 Ford F-150 XLT had been parked across the ramp. Next to Teresa sat Jasmine Ortiz, 29, a single mother from South Providence, whose 8-year-old son Mateo had nearly been clipped in a crosswalk when Daniel rolled through a right turn on red at Westminster and Dorrance. And on the aisle was Frank DeLuca, 73, retired crossing guard, right wrist still stiff in a black brace after he stumbled trying to yank a child back from that same curb. Share this with someone who needs to see that justice gets complicated when pain and accountability collide. Because Daniel Mercer was about to give everyone in that courtroom a reason to hate him first. The clerk, Sonia Patel, called the case in a steady voice. Case number PMC 1944721, City of Providence versus Daniel Mercer. Daniel stepped up. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Good morning, sir." Daniel gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Depends who you ask." That got a few murmurs from the gallery, not the charming kind, the annoyed kind. The judge stayed calm. "You've been cited with several violations on the same date, November 14, around 7:42 a.m. near Westminster Street and the Rhode Island Hospital access lane. How do you plead?" Daniel stared straight ahead, like somebody with a job who had a bad morning. Sonia Patel looked up from the docket. Officer Elena Ruiz, the citing officer, shifted near the rail. Jasmine Ortiz shook her head so hard her gold hoop earring flashed in the fluorescent light. Judge Caprio did not blink. "That's not a plea, Mr. Mercer." Daniel's voice hardened. "Then put down not guilty and let's stop pretending this is the trial of the century." The gallery reacted exactly the way you think it did. A few gasps, a whisper. Someone in the back said, "Wow." If this were a clip online, that first 20 seconds would have exploded already. The veteran was rude. The judge was calm. The victims were visible. The tension was instant. Everyone watching would assume they knew who the hero was and who the villain was. They were only half right. Judge Caprio leaned back. All right, not guilty. Let's take them one at a time. He lifted the first citation. Parking in a disabled access zone, specifically blocking the curb ramp for medical transport vehicles at Rhode Island Hospital. Officers' notes say the driver was asked twice to move and responded with profanity. Is that accurate? Daniel's expression didn't change. I parked for maybe 3 minutes. Teresa Callahan let out a breath through her nose. You could hear it. The judge glanced toward her, then back to Daniel. 3 minutes in front of a hospital access ramp can matter a great deal. Daniel finally ooked at him. And some people act like the world ends over every little thing. That line landed like a slap. Jasmine covered her mouth. Frank DeLuca muttered, little thing. Officer Ruiz took one step forward, as if she might be called. Judge Caprio's tone cooled. Watch your words, Mr. Mercer. Daniel shrugged. I said what I said. And there it was, the outrage moment. The room turned on him in real time, not gradually, instantly. The kind of instant judgment that travels faster than truth. On camera, it would have looked brutal. A veteran, a hospital, a disabled access lane, a rude answer. The internet would have devoured him. Then the judge opened the evidence packet. Inside was a still image from hospital surveillance. It showed Daniel's silver F-150 angled over the painted blue access hash marks, front bumper jutting across the ramp, windshield smeared with road salt, hazard lights blinking. In the lower corner of the image, time-stamped 7:43, 18 a.m., Teresa Callahan stood with a cane under a hospital awning while an orderly held a folded wheelchair and looked toward the blocked lane. The judge turned the photograph so Daniel could see it. Do you recognize your truck? Yeah. Do you recognize the woman in the lower right corner? Daniel glanced at Teresa and looked away almost immediately. No. That is Mrs. Teresa Callahan. She was arriving for an oncology appointment. Daniel's jaw flexed once. I didn't know that. Teresa spoke before the judge could answer. Her voice was raspy but steady. You didn't ask. Every head in the room turned. Judge Caprio nodded respectfully. Mrs. Callahan, I may hear from you in a moment. Daniel's nostrils flared. He was holding something back, but nobody knew what, not yet. The judge moved to the second citation. Failure to obey a traffic signal at Westminster and Dorrance. The report indicates you rolled through a right turn on red without full stop while pedestrians were in the crosswalk. Daniel said, I stopped enough. Jasmine stood up before anyone asked her to. Enough. My son's backpack got brushed by your mirror. Sonia Patel looked startled. Bailiff Raymond Costa raised a hand. Ma'am, please. But Judge Caprio said, It's all right, let her speak. Jasmine stepped to the rail, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with anger. She wore a maroon Target puffer coat, black leggings, and white sneakers with pink laces. Her son Mateo stood behind her clutching a small green dinosaur, wide-eyed, hair neatly faded at the temples like he'd been dressed for school before the morning went sideways. He didn't stop, Jasmine said. He looked right through us, like we weren't even there. Daniel turned his head sharply. I never touched your kid. No, Jasmine shot back. You scared him so bad he still won't cross a street unless I hold both his hands. That changed the energy again. Now it wasn't just a ticket, it was aftershock, consequence, fear that lingered beyond impact. Judge Caprio let the silence breathe. It stretched. The old radiator clicked. A phone buzzed somewhere in the back before being quickly silenced. Then the judge lifted the third paper. Expired registration. That's straightforward. Your registration had lapsed by 3 months. Daniel gave a dry laugh. Finally, one normal thing. The judge ignored the sarcasm. And the fourth charge, disorderly conduct toward Officer Elena Ruiz during the stop. Officer, step forward please. Elena Ruiz was 34, sharp-eyed, hair pulled into a low bun under her cap, winter patrol jacket zipped up over her uniform. Her body cam had already been entered into the packet. She rested one gloved hand on the rail. Judge Caprio said, "Officer, did Mr. Mercer use profanity toward you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did he refuse instructions?" "He complied eventually, but he was agitated, disoriented, and verbally hostile." Daniel laughed again. "Disoriented, that's a nice word." Judge Caprio caught that. "Would you prefer another one?" Daniel stared at the floor. Officer Ruiz continued. "When I approached the truck, he was breathing hard. He kept looking over my shoulder at nothing. I asked for license and registration. He dropped the registration papers twice. His hands were shaking. I thought at first he might be under the influence." A whisper moved through the crowd. There it was, another assumption ready to bloom. But Officer Ruiz did not stop there. "He was not intoxicated," she said. "No odor of alcohol, pupils normal, speech clipped but coherent. And when a sanitation truck hit a pothole behind us, he flinched so hard he ducked and reached under the seat." The judge looked up slowly. Daniel's face went blank. Jasmine frowned. Teresa leaned forward. Frank adjusted his wrist brace. Something had just shifted, but nobody knew how much. If you're still with this story, comment veteran below. Because the next piece of evidence is where everybody in that courtroom realized this was not just about traffic tickets anymore. DGE Caprio steepled his fingers. "Mr. Mercer, have you ever served in the military?" The question landed like a stone, dropped in deep water. Daniel did not answer right away. Officer Ruiz looked at him, then at the judge. Sonia Patel's pen stopped moving. Finally Daniel said, "That shouldn't matter." The judge's voice was gentle now. "Maybe it shouldn't, but sometimes it does." Daniel's eyes flashed with something much darker than anger. "I said it shouldn't matter." Caprio held his gaze. "Did you serve?" "A beat." "Yes." "Branch?" "Army." "Years?" 2003 to 2015. A different silence filled the room then, not softer, just heavier. Judge Caprio nodded. "Thank you for your service." Daniel's mouth twisted. People love saying that when they don't have to deal with what came home. You could hear someone exhale sharply in the back. The line was bitter, sharp, and painfully honest all at once. One of those lines that would be clipped and replayed a million times because it cut both ways. The judge did not defend himself. He simply asked, "Were you diagnosed with PTSD?" Daniel looked at him with open defiance. "What if I was? What if you were?" Daniel leaned closer to the rail. "Then I'm still the guy standing here with 4 tickets in half this room, acting like I ran over a parade." Outrage surged again. He had found the one way to make pain sound like contempt. Jasmine crossed her arms. Teresa shook her head. Frank muttered, "Still no apology." Judge Caprio's voice sharpened just enough. "Mr. Mercer, pain may explain behavior. It never excuses cruelty." That was the first quote that would later be everywhere. Daniel froze, not because he agreed, because he had been seen. The judge continued, "You may have had a bad morning. These people had one too, because of you." For the first time, Daniel had no fast answer. He swallowed once and looked away. Then Caprio did something unexpected. He asked Sonia Patel for the envelope tucked behind the citations, the one marked supplemental. Inside were 3 items. A printed incident report from the Providence Police Department. A brief letter on VA Providence Healthcare System letterhead. And a photo that had not been shown yet. Judge Caprio read the top line of the report, then slowed. Officer Ruiz watched him carefully. "What is it?" Daniel asked too quickly. The judge looked up. "Mr. Mercer, according to this report, when Officer Ruiz approached your vehicle, there was a photograph taped to your dashboard." Daniel's face changed so subtly most people would have missed it, but Judge Caprio did not miss much. "What photograph?" the judge asked. Daniel said nothing. Officer Ruiz answered, "A little girl in a purple recital dress, Your Honor." Jasmine glanced back at Mateo. Teresa's expression softened by 1 degree. The judge lifted the printed photo from the packet and held it up. A child of about 10, brown hair in a braid, missing front tooth, purple tulle skirt, big smile, a stage curtain in the background. "Who is she?" the judge asked. Daniel's voice came out lower now. "My daughter." Her name, it turned out, was Lily Mercer, 10 years old, lived in Warwick with Daniel's estranged wife, Erin. The photo had been taken the previous spring outside an elementary school music recital at 6:48 p.m., according to the timestamp in the corner. The judge asked if Daniel had taken it. "No," Daniel said. "Her mother did." "Why was it taped to your dashboard?" Daniel stared straight ahead. "Because I forgot to go." Nobody moved. Not Teresa. Not Jasmine. Not Officer Ruiz. Daniel went on before anyone could interrupt. "I was supposed to pick her up after rehearsal and take her to breakfast before school. I parked at the hospital because I was trying to get across town after missing her again. That's all." Again. That word hung in the air. Again meant pattern. Again meant failure. Again meant the one-ticket morning might be connected to a much bigger wreck. Judge Caprio glanced at the VA letter. "This says you were scheduled for an emergency psychiatric intake at 8:30 that same morning." Daniel's head snapped up. "That's private." "You handed it to Officer Ruiz when you dropped your papers." Officer Ruiz nodded once. It fell out of the registration sleeve. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, like someone who had been caught naked in public. The judge read from the letter, careful, measured. "Patient has a documented history of combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder, hypervigilance, severe sleep disturbance, and panic episodes triggered by sudden percussive noise. Patient has missed multiple treatment appointments." There was the second reveal. Not only was Daniel suffering, he was not showing up for help. And suddenly the question in the courtroom changed. Not is he hurting, but what has he done with that hurt? Judge Caprio set the papers down. "Mr. Mercer, were you on your way to treatment or running from it?" Daniel looked like he'd rather take 10 more tea. "Secrets then answer that one." Finally he said, "Both." You could feel the room shift again. That was the first crack. Not enough for mercy, not yet, but enough for curiosity. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Tell me what happened from the beginning. No speeches, no attitude, just the truth." Daniel took a breath that shuddered on the way in. "I didn't sleep the night before. Fire alarms in my apartment building at 2:11 a.m. Some kid burned toast or something. By 4 I was sitting in my truck. By 6 I was outside my ex-wife's place because I'd promised Lily breakfast before school. She came out dressed for music club, purple sweater, little silver shoes, asking if I remembered her solo. I said yes." He paused. "I hadn't." The courtroom stayed silent. "Erin saw I was off," he said. "She told me not to drive Lily anywhere. We argued. I left mad. I drove downtown. I was supposed to go to the VA at 8:30. Instead, I parked at a Dunkin' on Eddy Street trying to calm down. Then a truck hit something. Big metal bang. I heard it and..." He stopped. Judge Caprio finished the sentence softly. "And you weren't in Providence anymore." Daniel's jaw tightened. "No," he said, "I was." Now every person in that room was picturing it differently. Same truck, same morning, different movie playing behind his eyes. But there was still more, much more. because Judge Caprio had not yet opened the body cam transcript. And when he did, even Daniel Mercer looked like he might stop breathing. Officer Ruiz had written a clear report. At 7:41 a.m., she found Daniel's truck blocking the hospital access ramp. At 7:42, she approached on foot and tapped the driver's side glass. At 7:42 and 14 seconds, Daniel jerked so violently that his right shoulder smacked the window pillar. At 7:42 and 19 seconds, he shouted, "Get down," then reached under the seat with his left hand. Officer Ruiz drew back, hand on holster, and ordered him to show both hands. At 7:42 and 26 seconds, Daniel blinked hard several times, looked around, and said, "Where's the kid?" The judge read that line out loud. "Where's the kid?" Jasmine frowned. "What kid?" Daniel shut his eyes. Caprio asked, "Was there a child in the truck?" "No." "Then who were you talking about?" Daniel said nothing. The judge didn't press, not yet. Instead, he turned to Officer Ruiz. "Did Mr. Mercer calm down?" "Yes, Your Honor," after maybe 30 seconds. Then he got angry. "Angry at you?" "Yes." "Did he threaten you?" Officer Ruiz answered carefully. He said, "Just write the damn ticket. You have no idea what a bad day is." Then he hit the steering wheel with his palm hard enough to make the horn go off. A few people jumped at even that description. Daniel stared at the floor tiles. Judge Caprio asked, "Why, where's the kid?" Daniel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I thought." He stopped there. The judge waited. "I thought I heard screaming," Daniel said finally. "I thought I was back in Sangan. We had a convoy hit. There was a little boy." The air left the room. Not dramatically, quietly, like a room-sized body had been punched in the ribs. Teresa's hand rose to her chest. Jasmine looked down at Mateo and pulled him close. Officer Ruiz's expression changed, in a way police officers are trained not to let happen in public. Judge Caprio asked no further question. He didn't need to. Everyone could see Daniel was standing in two places at once now, Providence in his boots, Afghanistan in his eyes. But then Frank DeLuca spoke up from the aisle, and the case took another turn. "With respect, Your Honor," Frank said, voice rough with age, "I'm sorry for what happened to him. I really am. But if I didn't grab that little girl at the curb, she would have stepped right where his truck rolled through. We can feel bad for him and still tell the truth." That line landed hard because it was right. The judge nodded slowly. "Yes, we can." There was the moral complexity. No easy villain, no easy absolution. Judge Caprio turned back to Daniel. "Do you understand that your suffering put other people at risk?" Daniel answered immediately this time, "Yes." "Do you understand that being wounded does not make other people expendable?" A long pause. Then very quietly, "Yes." The judge studied him. "Do you believe that?" Daniel didn't answer. Because belief is harder than admission. If you've ever seen a moment where a courtroom stops being about law and becomes about truth, hit like now. Because Judge Caprio is about to bring forward the one witness nobody expected, and her words change the entire direction of this case. Teresa Callahan stood slowly, one hand on her cane, one on the bench for balance. Her coat was a neat navy peacoat with pearl buttons. Underneath, visible at the collar, was a pale blue scarf with tiny stitched anchors. The kind of scarf an old New England husband might have bought his wife 40 years ago and she never stopped wearing. She stepped to the rail. "Judge Capper." I.O.'s voice softened. "Mrs. Callahan, take your time." She nodded. "My husband, Patrick, served in Vietnam. Marines. He came home in 1970 and slept on the floor for 3 years because he couldn't stand being near windows. He'd sit in our kitchen at midnight with all the lights off because darkness felt safer than quiet. So when Officer Ruiz was talking just now, I knew that look." Daniel looked up at her for the first time and really saw her. Teresa went on. That morning, yes, I was upset. I had an infusion appointment. I was cold. My legs were hurting, and your truck blocked the ramp, so I had to wait while an orderly figured out another way to get me in. I was angry, but when I looked through your windshield, you were not looking at me. You were looking past me, like you were somewhere terrible. Nobody moved. Not even the bailiff. But, Teresa said, and that word cut the room in half. When Officer Ruiz got your attention and you came back, you looked right at me. You saw me with this cane. You saw the wheelchair, and you still cursed. Daniel swallowed hard. You don't get to use pain as a weapon, Teresa said. Not against strangers, not against women trying to get treatment, not against children in crosswalks. My husband learned that too late, don't you? That was the second quote that would spread everywhere. Daniel's face drained of color. Judge Caprio asked, Mrs. Callahan, what do you believe should happen today? Teresa took a breath. I believe he should be held accountable, and I believe if he walks out of here with only a fine, this court will have wasted everybody's pain. Even the judge seemed to sit back at that. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a plea for meaningful consequences. The gallery hummed with approval. Frank DeLuca nodded. Jasmine whispered, exactly. And Daniel Mercer looked like a man realizing that simple punishment might actually be easier than what was coming. Judge Caprio next called Frank DeLuca. Frank wore a red plaid flannel under a brown LL Bean vest, gray slacks, and white New Balance sneakers that squeaked slightly on the polished floor. He carried himself like a retired schoolman who had spent decades telling children not to run indoors and had no intention of softening now. Mr. DeLuca, the judge said, what did you observe? Frank cleared his throat. I was at the corner by the pharmacy, school kids crossing, light changed. This truck comes rolling, not flying but rolling steady, faster than it should. I waved, yelled. There was a little girl in a yellow coat stepping off the curb. I grabbed her backpack and stumbled. That's how I did this. He raised the brace. Doctor says sprain could have been worse. Was contact made? No. So no collision. Doesn't mean no danger. Agreed, said the judge. Frank looked at Daniel. You know what bothered me most? Not the truck, your face. You looked empty. And when a man is driving 2 tons of steel with an empty face, everybody else becomes collateral. That was another quote, another knife. Daniel's shoulders sagged 1 inch lower. Then Jasmine came forward with Mateo. At first she did not speak. She put a hand on her son's shoulder. Mateo held the green dinosaur up against his chest and stared at the judge like he'd wandered into the principal's office by mistake. Jasmine said, he wet the bed that night. The whole room tightened. Judge Caprio's expression changed instantly. Your son. Yes, first time in 2 years. He kept saying the truck was coming back. We're working on that. He's a good kid. He likes dinosaurs and math and drawing helicopters. But now every time a pickup turns too close, he grabs my coat. Daniel looked like he'd been hit. Jasmine was not done. You don't know us. You didn't ask our names. You didn't see what happened after. And that's why people get angry when someone says it was just a bad morning. She turned to Mateo. Baby, do you want to tell the judge anything? Mateo looked down, then up. I thought the truck was gonna squish us. There are lines a child says that no courtroom is prepared for. That was one of them. Someone in the back cried softly. Daniel pressed a hand over his mouth and looked away. Judge Caprio let the silence sit until it almost hurt. Then he asked the most important question yet. Mr. Mercer, do you want to say anything to the people affected before I continue? Everyone expected either stubbornness or a quick apology. They got neither. Daniel said no. The gallery erupted in whispers. Jasmine stepped back like she'd been insulted all over again. Frank rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. Teresa's disappointment was visible. Even Officer Ruiz seemed surprised. Judge Caprio stared at Daniel for a long moment. Why not? Daniel's voice was flat. Because if I start now, I'm not gonna stop. That changed everything again. He wasn't refusing because he didn't care. He was refusing because the dam was cracking. The judge saw it instantly. All right, he said. Then we're not finished. He looked at Sonia Patel. Do we have the supplemental witness statement from the VA counselor? Sonia flipped pages. Yes, Your Honor, attached behind the intake letter. Daniel's head snapped up. No. The word came out like panic, not protest. Judge Caprio noticed. Mr. Mercer. No, don't read that. Why? Because that's not for them. The judge's voice stayed even. You introduced your condition into this case by contesting the tickets and allowing the report to be submitted. If there is information relevant to understanding what happened, I need to see it. Daniel's breathing picked up. Officer Ruiz took one subtle step closer, not threatening, just ready. Caprio lifted the statement but did not read immediately. This is from Dr. Nia Bennett, clinical psychologist, Providence, VA. Dated November 13, one day before the incident. It says, patient reports escalating avoidance, emotional numbing, shame related to estrangement from spouse and child, severe guilt associated with civilian casualty memory, and refusal to attend group treatment because he believes he does not deserve recovery. Nobody in that room was prepared for that phrase. Does not deserve recovery. Daniel lowered his head. The judge continued. Patient exhibits anger as defensive masking over profound moral injury. At present, patient is at elevated risk of social collapse but is not expressing self-harm intent. Teresa closed her eyes. Jasmine's anger lost its edge and turned into something sadder. Frank looked at the floor. Judge Caprio set the paper down very carefully. Mr. Mercer, were you trying to be punished? Daniel gave a bitter smile without looking up. Would have been simpler. There was the third quote. The judge asked, simpler than what? Daniel laughed once, dry and broken. Simpler than going home and hearing my kid ask why I forgot her song again. No one spoke. No one had anything to add to that. And just when it seemed the room had reached its emotional limit, Sonia Patel quietly slid another document toward the judge. A handwritten note clipped to the back of the file, not from the VA, not from the city, from Daniel's ex-wife. Caprio looked at the name at the bottom, Aaron Mercer. He read the first two lines, then stopped. He looked at Daniel. Then he said, Mr. Mercer, your former wife submitted a letter for the court. Daniel went pale. She what? The judge did not answer right away. Because when he looked down at that letter, even he knew the next 2 minutes were going to hit harder than anything that had happened so far. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because the letter Judge Caprio reads next is the one that would make this clip go viral across the country. Aaron Mercer did not write like a lawyer. She wrote like a woman who had run out of ways to protect the people she loved from the same man she still loved. The paper was creased as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. Blue ink, no fancy language, just truth. Judge Caprio began. Your Honor, my name is Aaron Mercer. Daniel is my former husband, though we are not officially divorced. I am writing because I know the court will see the tickets, but I need someone to see the pattern. Daniel is not a criminal. He is a good man living inside a nervous system that no longer trusts the world. He startles when the microwave beeps. He sleeps in work boots because he says tying laces in the dark takes too long. Our daughter Lily loves him deeply, but she has started asking me which version of her dad is coming over, the quiet one, the angry one, or the one who forgets where he is. Every person in that courtroom was locked in now. Caprio read on. He has never hit us. He has never threatened us. But his silence has become its own kind of storm. He misses school concerts, then arrives with gifts we didn't ask for. He cries in the driveway so she won't see. He says he is protecting us by staying away, but what he is really doing is disappearing in slow motion. Daniel's hand gripped the rail so hard his knuckles blanched white. The judge's voice grew even gentler. If he was rude to the officer, that was wrong. If he endangered someone, that was wrong. Please hold him accountable, but please do not confuse his worst moments with his whole character. And please, if there is any way this court can make him face what he has become without destroying what is left, I am asking for that chance. Caprio lowered the letter. The room was silent. Not shocked silent, human silent. Daniel did not move. Not until Judge Caprio asked, "Did you know she wrote that?" Daniel shook his head. "What part of that is untrue?" Another shake, no words. The judge waited. Finally Daniel said, "The part where she says I'm a good man." There was a murmur of pain through the gallery. Teresa dabbed at her eye with a tissue. Jasmine looked at him differently now, not forgiven, but differently. Judge Caprio responded with a line that would later be quoted under thousands of clips. "The strongest men are not the ones who never break. They're the ones who tell the truth after they do." Daniel's eyes filled immediately. He turned away, jaw trembling, trying and failing to stay hard. Officer Ruiz looked down. Sonia Patel blinked fast. The judge let Daniel collect himself, but only for a moment. "I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Mercer. Do you want to say anything to the people who were affected by your actions?" This time Daniel nodded once, barely. He turned first to Teresa. "I'm sorry I saw you and still acted like that. You didn't do anything to me." Then to Frank. "I'm sorry you got hurt pulling that kid back. You shouldn't have had to." Then Jasmine. He could barely get the words out. "I'm sorry I scared your son." Jasmine held Mateo closer. But Daniel was not done. He bent slightly enough to look at the boy without towering over him. "I didn't want to squish you, buddy. I wasn't seeing right. That's not your job to understand, though. I'm just sorry." Mateo said nothing, but he stopped hiding behind his mother's coat. The apology did not erase the harm. It did something more important. It made the harm visible to the person who caused it. Judge Caprio asked, "And Officer Ruiz?" Daniel turned to her last. "I'm sorry for making you think you were walking up on something worse." Officer Ruiz gave a single nod. "Thank you." For a moment, it felt like the room might finally settle. Then the city prosecutor, Assistant Solicitor Mark Feldman, stood up from the side table, adjusted his charcoal suit jacket, and requested permission to address the court. That was the twist nobody wanted but the story needed. "Briefly," said Judge Caprio. Feldman stepped forward, files tucked under one arm. He was a compact man in his 50s with silver at the temples and the exact energy of someone whose whole life ran on order. "Your Honor, I appreciate the emotional context presented today. However, this defendant has received 3 prior municipal citations in the last 18 months, 2 for improper parking, 1 for failure to renew registration, all unpaid until collection notice. There is also a prior failure to appear." The room stiffened again. Daniel closed his eyes. Feldman continued, "This is not an isolated bad morning. The city's concern is public safety. Compassion cannot become a revolving door. Back to outrage, back to consequence, back to the hard truth that pain had been present before and had still changed nothing." Judge Caprio looked at Daniel. "Is that accurate?" "Yes. All of it. Yes." "Why didn't you appear?" Daniel answered without attitude for the first time. "Couldn't stand being in rooms like this." "That did not stop you from endangering people." "No, sir." "Did you pay the fines?" "Eventually." Why eventually? Daniel laughed softly, almost to himself. Because every envelope with a government seal sat unopened on my counter until rent day. Thought if I didn't look at it, maybe I wasn't falling apart. The judge nodded once, not approval, recognition. Feldman pressed on. Your Honor, the city recommends full fines, immediate registration compliance, and mandatory referral for further review of driving fitness. There it was, the legal version of a hammer. Perfectly reasonable, entirely justified, totally insufficient. Judge Caprio did not rule yet. Instead, he asked for the fourth supporting statement in the file. This one came from a man named Luis Ortega. When the judge read the first line, Daniel looked like he might collapse. Mr. Ortega is your former platoon medic. Daniel said, yeah. Would you like me to read his statement? No. Why? Because he remembers things I try not to. Judge Caprio considered him, then said, that may be exactly why I should. Luis Ortega's statement was typed, precise, and brutal in its honesty. Daniel Mercer was the staff sergeant who carried a wounded interpreter 50 yards under fire in Sangin in July 2011. He was also the NCO who kept a photograph of his newborn daughter in the chest pocket of his plate carrier and showed it to us every night like proof that something clean still existed in the world. On the day in question that haunts him, a civilian vehicle approached our convoy after warning signs were ignored. Daniel gave the final halt command. The vehicle detonated. Later, we found a child in the rear compartment. Daniel has blamed himself ever since, despite acting under rules of engagement. Nobody in that room breathed normally again after that. Caprio kept reading. If you are seeing anger in Daniel, understand that shame often wears anger like body armor, but body armor can still crush the people hugging you. If the court has any influence, do not just fine him. Make him choose between his excuses and his life. That line hit like a verdict before any verdict had been given. Make him choose between his excuses and his life. Daniel's chest rose and fell unevenly. Judge Caprio placed the paper down. Mr. Mercer, is that the child you thought of when Officer Ruiz approached your truck? Daniel nodded once. When you said, where's the kid? Another nod. And when you saw Mateo in the crosswalk? Daniel's voice cracked. I saw both of them. No one in that room was ready for that sentence. It was the moment of realization, the true one, the one where Daniel stopped sounding angry and started sounding haunted. Jasmine pressed her lips together, her eyes glossed over. Mateo looked up at her, confused by adult sorrow. Judge Caprio leaned in slightly. Mr. Mercer, look at me. Daniel obeyed. You have suffered deeply, but the people in this courtroom are not fragments of your past. They are real, present, breathing. If you keep driving through life like every shadow is a battlefield, someone will die. Do you understand me? Yes, Daniel whispered. Say it so your daughter could hear it. Daniel's voice rose, shaky but clear. If I don't get help, someone could die. That was the breaking point. Everything changed after that. The first tear fell before he could hide it. Then another. Then Daniel Mercer, the man who had walked in armored with sarcasm and anger, covered his eyes with both hands and bent at the waist like something inside him had finally given way. Nobody mocked him. Nobody looked away. Teresa cried openly now. Frank stared at the floor. Officer Ruiz swallowed and blinked hard. Judge Caprio waited until Daniel straightened again, still trembling. Then he spoke the line that would become the spine of the entire viral clip. The law can punish a moment. Wisdom has to heal the man. That was the fourth quote. And yet even then, the judge was not finished. Because now came the choice. If I simply fine you, Caprio said, you will pay or you won't. You will leave this courtroom, get in that truck, and remain dangerous in a different suit of clothes. If I excuse everything because you are a veteran, I insult every veteran who fought their injuries without passing them to strangers. So here is the only question that matters. Are you finally ready to be helped? Daniel did not answer immediately. That alone made the room tense again. Was he going to retreat? Was he going to defend himself? Was he going to do the exact thing he had always done and choose shame over recovery? Judge Caprio did not rescue him. Feldman did not speak. Officer Ruiz stood still as stone. And Daniel, after staring at the rail for what felt like a full minute, said the quietest sentence of his life. "I don't know how." Another silence. Then Judge Caprio gave him the fifth quote. "You don't need to know how. You need to stop saying no." If that had been the end, the clip would still have gone everywhere. But the most unforgettable part was still ahead. Because Judge Caprio asked the court for 10 minutes. He called a recess. And during that recess, something happened in the hallway outside Courtroom 3 that no one in the gallery ever forgot. If this story has you on edge, comment mercy or accountability, because when the court comes back from recess, Judge Caprio makes a decision so unexpected it leaves even the prosecutor speechless. The hallway outside smelled like coffee, wet wool, and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The court vending machine clicked as someone bought a ginger ale. Daniel stood alone near a bulletin board covered in notices about parking appeals and community service hours, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes red, face raw. Officer Ruiz was the first person who approached him. Not to arrest him, not to lecture him, to speak plainly. "I've got a brother-in-law in the Guard," she said. "Saw some things overseas. He waited too long too." Daniel nodded without looking at her. She continued, "You scared me this morning." "I know. You scared them worse." "I know." She let that sit. "But for the record, when I first knocked on your glass, your face didn't look mean. It looked lost." Daniel shut his eyes. Officer Ruiz reached into her breast pocket, took out a folded card, and handed it to him. Providence VA Crisis Response. Dr. Nia Bennett's direct extension written in blue pen on the back. "Don't make me have to see you like this behind a steering wheel again," she said. That was not softness. It was responsibility with a human face. Daniel took the card like it might burn him. A few feet away, Teresa was seated on a wooden bench rubbing her hands for warmth. Jasmine stood with Matteo near the water fountain. Frank DeLuca paced slowly, protecting his wrist. Nobody was comfortable. Nobody was certain. Then Matteo did something children do that adults forget is possible. He walked over to Daniel. Jasmine started to stop him. Teresa touched her sleeve and shook her head very slightly. Matteo held out the green dinosaur. "You can hold him if you're scared." There are moments the internet calls unbelievable because they are too clean, too cinematic, too precise. But life sometimes humiliates us with how direct children can be. Daniel stared at the toy. His hands shook as he accepted it. "It's a stegosaurus," Matteo said. "Thanks," Daniel whispered. "It fights with spikes." Daniel gave a broken little laugh. "Yeah. Yeah, but it's still nice." That line nearly ended Teresa. She covered her face. Jasmine looked away, because if she looked directly at them, she would lose it. Daniel crouched, careful, slow, the way soldiers kneel near unstable ground. "I'm sorry I scared you, buddy." Matteo considered him with all the ruthless simplicity of childhood. "Are you done being mean now?" Daniel looked like he'd been stripped to the bone. "I'm trying to be." Matteo nodded, satisfied enough for the moment, and took back the dinosaur. By the time court resumed, the temperature in the room had changed entirely. Not less serious, more honest. Judge Caprio returned to the bench, adjusted his glasses, and called the case back on record. Daniel stood again, but this time the hard posture was gone. He looked exhausted, human, reachable. The judge began slowly. I have considered the city's recommendation. I have considered the victim's statements. I have considered your record, your service, your diagnosis, and your conduct this morning. I am not interested in performative sympathy. I am interested in whether this court can prevent another dangerous morning. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Mercer, I am going to ask you some direct questions, and I want direct answers. Yes, sir. Do you currently drive for work? Yes, residential construction, mostly material runs. Who is your employer? Coventry Home Repair. Owner's name is Steve Barlow. Have you told him about your diagnosis? No. Why not? Daniel gave a hollow laugh. Guys in my line of work don't exactly bring that up over plywood. Judge Caprio nodded, then wrote something down. Do you currently have active treatment? No. Medication. Stop taking it. When? 6 weeks ago. Why? Daniel's answer came faster than expected. Because sleeping without dreams felt like cheating, and because feeling nothing made me mean in a different way. The judge absorbed that. Have you ever harmed yourself? Daniel hesitated. The room tensed. No, he said, not on purpose. That is not the answer I asked for. Daniel's voice dropped. No. Judge Caprio held his gaze a second longer, deciding whether he believed him. Then he moved on. Mrs. Callahan, Ms. Ortiz, Mr. DeLuca, Officer Ruiz, I am going to ask something unusual. In your view, what would real accountability look like here? This was the unexpected twist around the 6,000-word mark. The judge was not just sentencing. He was inviting the harm to define justice. Teresa answered first. Treatment, verified, not promises. Jasmine said, and he should have to face people, not hide in his truck and call that coping. Frank nodded. Community service where he has to be careful around others, something structured. Officer Ruiz added, and no driving until a clinician clears him after acute evaluation. Assistant Solicitor Feldman looked like this had gone far beyond his neat columns of fines, but even he could not deny the wisdom of it. Judge Caprio then turned to Daniel. Do you hear what every person in this room is saying? Not one of them asked me to destroy you. They asked me to stop you from destroying yourself and taking others with you. Daniel swallowed. Yes, sir. Can you comply with treatment? A pause. Then, if somebody makes me. A ripple of laughter, sad but real, moved through the room. Judge Caprio almost smiled. Very well, I can arrange that. He read the sentence slowly, each condition like a rung on a ladder. On the citation for expired registration, fine of $100, suspended pending proof of renewal within 14 days. Daniel nodded. On the citation for improper parking and obstruction of disabled access, fine of $250, suspended contingent upon 60 hours of supervised community service with veterans transitional housing and 2 transportation assistance shifts at Rhode Island Hospital Mobility Services, if approved by the program. Teresa exhaled. That one mattered to her. On the failure to obey traffic signal, I am imposing a formal driving safety review recommendation and ordering no non-essential driving for 30 days, with employer notification permitted if necessary for compliance. Daniel looked scared but said, Yes, sir. On the disorderly conduct citation, I am imposing a nominal fine of $50, which will remain due, because Officer Ruiz did not deserve your contempt. Daniel nodded harder this time. Yes, sir. Then the judge lowered his voice and delivered the part nobody saw coming. In addition, this court will continue the matter for 90 days. During that period, you will provide documentation of weekly treatment attendance with the VA, one family counseling intake if your wife is willing, and a written apology to each affected party here today. Not a copied template, not lawyer language, your words. Daniel looked stunned. Judge Caprio was not done. If you fail any part of that, all suspended fines become due in full, and I will refer the matter for further review. If you comply, the suspended financial penalties will remain suspended. The goal is not to trap you. The goal is to see whether you finally choose your life. You could feel the room release and tighten at the same time. Mercy, but expensive mercy, mercy with structure. Assistant Solicitor Feldman stood. Your Honor, may the record reflect the city's concern about enforceability. It may, said Caprio, and may the record also reflect that punishment without intervention would be cheaper, cleaner, and less effective. Feldman sat down. Then came the smallest, strangest, most unforgettable detail of the day. Judge Caprio reached into his jacket pocket, took out a crisp $50 bill, and placed it on the clerk's desk. This covers the disorderly conduct fine if the defendant completes treatment for 30 days without missing an appointment. If he fails, return it to me and reinstate the amount. The gallery actually gasped. Daniel stared at him. Why would you do that? Caprio answered with the line people would replay most. Because mercy is not the opposite of justice. Mercy is what keeps justice human. That was the sixth quote, the biggest one. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. Tears came again, faster this time. I don't deserve that. Judge Caprio replied instantly, then earn it. There was the seventh quote. The courtroom broke, not into chaos, into emotion, real, audible emotion. Teresa cried. Jasmine cried. Officer Ruiz looked down and smiled the way people do when they are trying not to. Even Frank DeLuca's eyes went wet, though he hid it by adjusting his brace. And if that had been the end, it would already be one of those courtroom stories people send to each other at midnight with the caption, "Watch this all the way through." But Judge Caprio had one final question, and Daniel's answer to it is what turned the story from moving to unforgettable. Mr. Mercer, the judge said, what are you going to do when you leave this courtroom? Daniel looked at the card Officer Ruiz had given him, still folded in his palm. Then he looked at the judge. I'm going to the VA. Caprio nodded. Today? Yes, sir. Not tomorrow. No, sir. Not after lunch. Daniel shook his head. Now. And from the back of the room, in a voice cracked with age and chemo and experience, Teresa Callahan said, Good. That one word felt like a blessing and a warning. The hearing ended at 10:07 a.m. But the story did not. Because outside the courthouse, on the granite steps overlooking Dorrance Street, Daniel Mercer did something no one in his life had ever seen him do in public. He called Erin. She answered on the third ring. Everyone close enough to hear knew they were listening to a private moment, but nobody could look away. Hey, Daniel said, voice wrecked. A long pause. Then Erin's voice through the phone, faint but audible. What happened? Daniel swallowed. I think I got caught. Caught doing what? Drowning. He turned away from the crowd and pressed a hand over his face. I'm going to the VA right now. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because a judge just looked at me like he could see straight through the excuses. Another pause, longer this time. Then Erin said, Call me when you get there. Daniel closed his eyes. Okay. It would have been enough to stop there. Enough to give the audience relief. Enough to wrap the story in that warm, immediate redemption people crave. But real redemption is slower than a courthouse staircase. So let's go 3 weeks forward. Because 3 weeks later, Judge Caprio's clerk received the first letter. If you believe real change has to be proven, not promised, Share this with someone who needs the reminder, because the update Daniel sends from rehab week 3 is where this story hits even harder. The envelope was plain white, no lawyer return address, just Daniel Mercer, Warwick, Rhode Island, written in block letters that looked carved rather than written. Inside were 4 handwritten notes. One to Teresa, one to Jasmine, one to Frank, one to Officer Ruiz. And clipped to them was proof of attendance from Dr. Nia Bennett, weekly trauma therapy, medication review, sleep stabilization plan, and enrollment in a moral injury group for combat veterans. Sonia Patel later said the handwriting on the apology letters changed halfway through each page. The first lines were rigid, like a man trying to stay in control. The later lines loosened, slanted, became human. Teresa's letter read in part, "You were right that morning. I had turned pain into a weapon because anger felt cleaner than shame. I keep hearing you say, don't use pain as a weapon. I wrote it on a card in my truck. I know long. Park at hospital entrances unless I'm doing mobility assistance. And now, I'm usually the guy holding the wheelchair." Jasmine's letter said, "I cannot give your son back the morning I took from him, but I can tell you what I'm doing to make sure there are fewer mornings like that in the world." Frank said, "You called me empty-faced. I hated that because it was true." Officer Ruiz said, "Thank you for staying calm when I gave you every reason not to feel safe." The letters circulated quietly at first, not online, person to person, court staff, family, a few local officers, one hospital transport supervisor, one VA counselor, small circles of people who deal in human fallout and know a real turnaround when they see one. Then came month 2. Daniel showed up for every session. Not elegantly, not heroically. He showed up angry, late once but still there, sweating through panic in the waiting room, leaving one group session after hearing a helicopter overhead and then coming back in because Dr. Bennett met him outside and said, "If you run every time the body remembers, the body becomes your boss." That was another quote, not from the courtroom but part of the same redemption. He renewed his registration on day 9. He handed his keys to his boss, Steve Barlow, and said he needed ride coverage for deliveries for a while. Steve, a barrel-chested contractor with a red Sox cap and a Marlboro cough, stared at him for 10 seconds and said, "You should have told me 2 years ago." Then he assigned Daniel to indoor finishing jobs for the month and kept him on payroll anyway. He began his hospital mobility shifts on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That part changed him most. At first he hated the smell. Antiseptic, coffee, clean linen, all the different kinds of suffering under one roof. It made his skin crawl, but then on his 4th shift he recognized a scarf with stitched anchors. Teresa Callahan. She looked up from her chair and smiled like she had expected him to flinch. He didn't. He pushed her wheelchair himself. Through automatic doors, past the gift shop, past a volunteer kiosk with stale peppermint candy, into the elevator with mirrored walls where no one could avoid seeing their own face. "You look better," Teresa said. "I sleep some now." "Good. I still wake up mean." "Then wake up and stay." Daniel laughed softly. "You always talk like that." "Only when I'm right." That friendship was not instant, but it was real. She told him stories about Patrick, the Marine husband who used to sort screws into labeled coffee cans in the basement because order was the only thing that quieted him. Daniel listened, really listened. Sometimes that was the service being done. Meanwhile, Jasmine noticed small things too. One afternoon after school, a volunteer from the Veterans Housing Program visited her son's class for career day. Not Daniel, another man, but Jasmine realized Mateo had stopped grabbing her coat at every pickup turn. The fear had not vanished. It had loosened. Then she received Daniel's second note, short, just 3 lines. I passed the same intersection today as a passenger. I made myself look at the crosswalk instead of the past. I thought you should know. She cried over that one in her kitchen. Month 3 brought the hardest test. July fireworks. Anyone who works with trauma knew it was coming. Knew the holiday that looks like celebration to some people feels like incoming fire to others. Dr. Bennett told Daniel to plan, not hope, plan. So he did something he had never done before. He did not isolate. He spent the evening at the VA group room with 3 other veterans, one counselor, a Bluetooth speaker playing old Motown to cover the bursts, and a bowl of pretzels nobody touched much. At 9:17 p.m., when the loudest round rattled the windows, Daniel dropped his cup of coffee and half stood out of reflex. Then he looked around. Not desert, not convoy, folding chairs, white cinder block, a humming vending machine. Other men breathing through the same storm. Afterward, he texted Erin one sentence. "Still here?" She replied with a picture of Lily asleep on the couch, holding a music folder against her chest. 3 words under it. She asked today. Asked what? He called. Erin answered. She asked if you'd come to her fall recital, Erin said. Daniel sat with that like it was fragile glass. Did you tell her yes? I told her only if you tell her yourself. He did 2 nights later, on FaceTime. Lily made him promise twice, then 3 times because children know promises are cheaper than attendance. This story could have ended with therapy attendance and apology letters and a nice courtroom quote. Most competitors would stop there. But what makes a story live in people is proof. Visible proof. Time jump proof. So now let's go 92 days after the hearing, back to Courtroom 3, for the review date Judge Caprio set. Because what happened on that return date is the reason this story became the most talked about clip in Providence that season. Comment redemption if you believe people can change when mercy comes with responsibility. Because Daniel Mercer's return to court is where Judge Caprio gets his answer. It was a Tuesday morning, colder than the first hearing. December wind whipped off the Providence River and rattled the courthouse flag. Inside, Courtroom 3 was full again, though this time not by accident. Word had spread. Some came because they loved Judge Caprio. Some came because they had seen the first clip on local TV or social media, cut with captions like "Angry Veteran BREAKS down in court" and "Judge's response STUNS room." Others came because in cities like Providence, people recognize when a story belongs to the whole community. At 9:22 a.m., Daniel Mercer stepped back to the rail. He looked different. Not magically healed, not polished, just different. Hair trimmed, cap gone, navy button-down under a charcoal peacoat, shoulders less locked, eyes clearer. He still had the same face, the same history, the same scar by his left brow, but he looked like a man standing inside his own body instead of bracing to abandon it. Judge Caprio looked down at the compliance packet and said, almost casually, "Mr. Mercer, I see you have given my clerk a great deal to read." A small laugh moved through the room. Daniel nodded, "Yes, sir." The judge lifted the treatment summary. 12 therapy sessions attended, 4 group sessions. Medication management resumed with adjustment. Family intake completed. Community service hours 68 completed rather than 60. Mobility assistance all shifts completed. Registration current. Employer letter submitted. No new violations. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Caprio looked over his glasses. You overdid the hours. Daniel almost smiled, wanted some cushion. Even the judge smiled at that. Then he reached for the family letter. This one was from Lily. Not handwritten in perfect cursive, printed in large, slightly crooked letters with a purple felt-tip marker. Judge Caprio asked permission to read it. Daniel said yes, but looked terrified. The letter said, "Dear Judge, thank you for making my dad go to Dr. Talking. He still gets sad sometimes, but now he answers his phone and he came to my concert and remembered the songs. He also doesn't sit in the driveway for a long time anymore. Love, Lily Mercer, age 10. The courtroom was gone after that. Teresa cried before the judge even finished. Jasmine laughed through tears. Frank DeLuca blew his nose loudly and pretended it was allergies. Daniel looked down and wiped both eyes with the heel of his hand, like he was annoyed at them for existing. Judge Caprio set the letter down and asked, "Did you attend the concert?" "Yes, sir." "Did you remember the songs?" Daniel laughed, really laughed. "I practiced." "What was she wearing?" That question surprised him. "A blue dress," Daniel said immediately. "White cardigan, little silver shoes again. Different pair from before, but she said they were lucky." Caprio nodded, satisfied. Then Jasmine stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, may I say something?" "You may." She stepped forward with Mateo, who now wore a tiny denim jacket with a NASA patch on the shoulder. "I just want the court to know, he wrote to my son too, and Mateo wanted to bring something." Mateo held out a folded page, construction paper, crayon drawing. On one side, a judge behind a big bench. On the other, a tall man next to a truck with a giant red X over it and, oddly enough, a green stegosaurus. The courtroom laughed softly. Jasmine said, "Mateo says the red X means no scary driving." Caprio accepted the drawing like it was an exhibit of the highest order. "I think that's a sound legal principle." More laughter, warm this time. Then Teresa stood. "Your Honor," she said, "I know this isn't standard procedure, but I want the record to show that Mr. Mercer pushed me to oncology 6 times and never once parked illegally." The room cracked up, including Judge Caprio. Daniel looked embarrassed. 8 times, actually. Teresa raised an eyebrow. "Don't get cocky." That line got the biggest laugh of the morning. But then she grew serious. "He also sat with me one day after treatment when I was sick and my ride was late. We talked about my husband. He did what hurting men rarely do. He listened without trying to outrun himself." That landed deep. Officer Ruiz was there too, off-duty in a black wool coat. Judge Caprio acknowledged her. "Officer, anything to add?" She stepped forward. "Only this, Your Honor. I've done enough roadside encounters to know when someone is just putting on a performance. This isn't that." He came back to the VA the same day. Dr. Bennett confirmed it after I checked in through proper channels with his permission. I also saw him at the hospital once. He thanked every staff member by name. Daniel looked mortified that so many people were testifying about his improvement, which, in its own way, vetted. Assistant Solicitor Feldman even stood and said, "The city has reviewed the compliance documentation and has no objection to maintaining the suspended fines as previously ordered." That was the institutional version of applause. Then Judge Caprio looked at Daniel and asked the one question everybody wanted answered. "What changed?" Daniel took a long breath. "Honestly, I hope so." Daniel glanced at the gallery, at Teresa, Jasmine, Mateo, Frank, Officer Ruiz, then back at the judge. "I got tired of making everyone else live inside the blast radius of things they didn't do." No one spoke. He continued, "For years I told myself I was isolating to protect people. That sounded noble. It was. It was easier to disappear than to be accountable. Easier to miss concerts and call it sacrifice. Easier to be angry than ashamed. Then I stood in here and heard a little boy say he thought my truck was gonna squish him, and I realized I had become the thing I kept telling myself I was trying to prevent." That was one of the strongest lines in the whole story.